Okay, so hello Bon. Basically a quick voice lap to run you through Le Mans and any thoughts I've got, obviously just a starter for three, so to speak. Coming up here, obviously, you're always going to be right out over those sort of blue and yellow echelons on the left, getting as much out to the left to get as good a line through the fast right before braking for the Dunlop chicane as possible. Be aware of traffic exiting the pits, especially prototypes, because they'll just come flat out, and even if they keep into the right of the white line, they'll still be actually where you want to be when you come in towards the apex after that fast right. So keeping it to the right here, nice and parallel with the edge of the track, hard brake. Obviously be careful to make sure you have the car either completely straight before you really hard brake, or start braking a little bit more gently while still turning the wheel here. Otherwise, you know from experience, not yourself, but having watched what happened at the Aston Martin Festival, what can happen. Hard on the brakes and then second gear through here. Using a little bit of the curb on the left especially. They're quite aggressive, these curves, but you do need to use them if you're going to be quick. I think on this lap I run the exit too much. I blow the exit. As one place you need to watch a little bit for track limits on the exit. It won't damage the car at all. There are no trenches or anything there. Then dropping down through here, you want to get a nice flowing line coming out of the Dunlop chicane, staying left and then turning in through the right here. You'll see that white line on the screen in front of you. That's the Bugatti circuit going off to the right, and there's a bump as you go over that. That's where that little bump is that can unsettle the car a little bit in the wet especially, and especially if you hit that bump while you're still really turning the wheel. So you want to try and get that smooth line so when you're going over that bump, you're not actually putting a lot of steering angling if possible, which means a slightly later swoop down the hill towards the S's that are coming up. Also be aware of traffic around you, because prototypes will want to clear you and get back in front of you in order to get as good a line as possible through the next S's. So just be aware of that, and because it can cause problems. Alan McNish actually had a problem there. He didn't think he cleared a car and he still clipped it and had a big accident. So just be aware a little bit here of potential prototype traffic around you. On the exit of the S's here, easy to drift out onto the grass on the left hand side. You can see, in fact, if we go a bit further forward, you can see how much the circuit curves round to the right hand side. So if you do run wide here, and it's quite easy if you're going really early to throttle here, you kind of get popped up over the brow of the hill. Quite easy to run a bit wide and end up putting your left hand wheels over the curb and onto the grass. So just be a little bit careful there. Tetra Rouge a lot faster than you think. You can cut the apex on the inside and then run the exit as well. They don't tend to do you here for track limits, because if you cut too much on the inside or run too wide on the exit, they've done trenches into the track, and those trenches will actually rip your suspension off if you hit them hard enough and go into them enough. Having said that, you'll see from Matt Griffin's onboard that I sent you the link to earlier that you can run a reasonable amount of exit here. Fourth gear in Assetto and in real life. I'm a bit too wide there, definitely. You won't want to be going quite that wide. Coming up here, you can actually see, as you're coming out to the Mulsanne straight, again, there's like a camber shift. And then the wet, just be careful coming out of here, because as you come out onto the public road, so to speak, normally there's a lake of water, and even if there isn't an actual standing water, it can be very, very slippery. You suddenly have a change in traction, and you're still kind of going up through the gears here. So just be a little bit careful in the wet. So Mulsanne straight, very strange the first time, as you know, when you drive down it, the car kind of hunts in the track-made tram lines that are in the road, which is quite disconcerting, but it's amazing how quickly you don't even notice it. In the wet, be careful not to run down the sides of the road, apart from if you have to overtaking, because obviously it puddles up, obviously more quickly. Try and run down the middle of the track in the crown of the road, and that will help avoid aquaplaning, especially in heavy rain. So 6th gear down here, you've got really nice markers. It's quite a nice place to learn, pick up rather, your braking points using the markers. So when we do brake, you'll brake somewhere between the 200 and the 150 probably to start with, and then you want to brake very hard initially to get as much speed off as possible, and then you turn in carrying speed all the way into the right. When you've got it really good, you kind of brake all the way into the right, and as you arrive at the left-hand apex, as you'll see from this lap that I've done, and also a lot of the time in real life, you kind of brake, turn in, then have to get back into a little bit of throttle, then brake again for the left coming out. As you're coming out of this chicane, the curve on the right, you'll kind of drift up onto it anyway. Be a little bit careful if you go beyond it, because there's a big hole behind it, which can cause a lot of suspension damage if you're not careful. So just be a bit wary of the exit curb here particularly, but you can run all the way out onto the left as you come out onto the second part of the Mulsanne straight. So again, a little bit harder to actually judge your braking points going into this second chicane, but the principle of the second chicane almost identical to the first, other than that I tend to go in 3rd gear into the first left and then braking again and down to 2nd gear for the right. It's easy, and I actually do it on this particular lap, to go into that second right a bit too quick, which compromises how early you can get back to full throttle. And it's all about getting back early to throttle and winding that wheel straight as quickly as possible in all of these chicanes in order to get maximum exit speed. So you can run right over to the right hand side there. Now obviously you have a quick look in your mirrors for prototypes, and as you're coming up the hill here over to the left hand side towards the brow before you get to Mulsanne, just be a little bit wary of prototypes coming behind you. And as you can see here, it's quite a steep hill, in fact, and it shows quite well on this game. So basically coming up this hill, hold on to the revs a little bit longer than you might normally, so that you're in a position to then drop back into a real singing point on the revs on your torque curve. And that helps you going up that hill. Otherwise, you always feel like you're just slowing down as you upshift. So coming down into Mulsanne corner, very, very tricky. Again, as we've talked about, too much grip on this particular car model at the moment. I go into it, into the right-hand apex, and I'm flat all the way into the right-hand apex, which I can do in a prototype, but I wouldn't be able to do it, I don't think, in our GTE car. So you tend to start braking gently as you're turning in from probably the 100 board. So you brake gently to begin with, and then as you arrive at the right-hand apex, you straighten her up diagonally across the track, and that's when you really get into the brakes really hard for Mulsanne corner. 2nd gear in this, or 1st gear in real life. I think it could be one of those where you could actually do it 2nd gear in real life as well. Be careful going in that you don't grab a wheel or lock up, because it's easy, it's slightly bumpy there. And if you are locked up, rather than try and make the corner, just go straight, because even though you will go into the gravel, there's a lot further distance before you reach the wall. Whereas if you turn in and try and make the apex going too quick and then run wide on the exit, as you'll see, the track circuit barriers come right back in on the exit, so you'll have a much higher impact because you've got far less distance before you get to them. You can cut the right hand apex a lot, especially after everyone's knocked all the bollards down, and then on the exit you want to straddle the blue and white curb right under the middle of the car. So going down through these kinks, going down towards Indianapolis, just make sure you, even if you're, especially if you're slipstreaming another GT car, make sure you look out for traffic. Easy to go side by side through here, so it's not a problem if you see it, you can keep your foot in. It's only if you haven't seen somebody, it can have a disastrous consequence here. So especially in the daylight, just keep half an eye out because they come up on you pretty quick. Right, coming down into Indianapolis, the first right, as we've said, far too quick in this. I think I go through in 6th. In real life, Fisichella brakes, goes down 2 gears to 4th gear. So you kind of brake, turn in, get back on a balanced throttle. So as you arrive, it's cambered positively here. So as you arrive kind of in the dip of the camber, you're back in the throttle. You can actually get back into full throttle if you're lucky, but also compromising, really hold it tight as you're coming through this right-hand kink on the exit, no more than the middle of the road in terms of running wide, and then you can get it back over, not right over to the right hand side, because if you're really quick through this first part of Indianapolis you won't be able to do that, but getting it over to the right as much as you can in order to get it straight and still be in time to brake, get down to 2nd gear for the really tight left, which is again cambered. So turn in early, doesn't matter, again both of these, but especially the second part of Indianapolis, turn in early, that camber will be your friend. So 2nd gear through the final part of Indianapolis, back up to 3rd before we get to Arnage. Very slippy here, easy to outbrake yourself. The cars that stop in normal circumstances on when this is a crossroads drop oil, so especially in the wet it's greasy as anything. So brake always a little bit on the early side and just think about power down, winding the lock straight on the exit. Again, if you lock up, you can go straight. There's a lot more runoff now, but be careful. Not dissimilar to Mulsanne, the track comes back in a lot on the exit. So if you run a little bit wide because you've been a bit too eager with your throttle, just be aware that if you're running a bit wide on the exit, the tyre wall does come back in pretty quickly on the way out of this corner. So going up to the Porsche curves, again, watch for prototypes behind you because they'll dive down the inside of you into the Porsche curves. So about this point here, I have a good look. If I can't see any prototypes at this point, I'm probably safe that they're not going to dive underneath me going into the Porsche curves. But again, have another good look as you arrive at the Porsche curves, a bit before the braking point for the Porsche curves, just to make sure that you can't see anyone because they will arrive at you in the middle of the Porsche curves, probably the long right. They'll go around the outside of you there. So again, just gives you a nice idea of traffic behind you if you can have a good few looks going up this straight as you approach Porsche. It's not really straight, so have a good look in the mirrors as well as in the camera. So there's 3 markers on the road here. Use those little arrows which you can see as your base to where you turn in. Turn in slightly on the early side for the first part of the Porsche curves, and down in this game I think I go down 1 gear. Fisichella goes down to 4th gear for the first right, and then he turning on the early side, make a long apex, hugging the apex, keeping it to the right a reasonable amount so that the next left is flat. So flat through this left in real life. Fisichella then goes up to, I'm actually 5th all the way through here. Fisichella did 4th for the first right, then goes back up to 5th just on the exit of this corner, then back down to 4th again, then back up to 5th through the long right. So I've actually kept it in 5th and then 4th all the way through. So at this point here, you want to make sure as you're coming into this right hand, it's almost like a double apex. So you come through here, there's a little brake for that second left, then this brake is a much firmer brake to get the nose in, otherwise it washes out, which is actually what happens to me with this one. But you kind of get over to the right because you're naturally shoved to the right. You kind of brake a little bit, go down a gear, drift out, and then drift back in again, trying to sacrifice on the exit. So you start on the right hand side for the final left coming out of the Porsche curves. And for that final left in this, in fact, we'll move it on a little bit and then I'll talk about that. way too much understeer there. I took too much speed in. I should have braked a bit harder, and then I would have been able to tuck the nose in. So I want to be parallel with that right hand side, those white line where the grass is on the right. I'm flat through this left in this, which is ridiculous. In real life, you need to brake quite firmly. And then turn in, not a hard brake, but a firm brake, and use that to get the nose in. This is off camber here, so in the wet and in the dry, but especially in the wet, this can catch you out with the rear as you turn in. But I found it's quicker here to brake a little bit on the early side, turn in, use that brake pressure on the front on the nose to get the nose turned in, then get back to full throttle really early with the steering wheel straighter so you don't run too much off on the exit over the echelons on the exit, and that's actually quicker than steaming into this left and being a little bit slow, maybe 20-30 meters later to full throttle. Through this kink here, very careful with traffic. It's easy to go side by side through here so long as you've seen them, but just be a little bit wary with the prototype traffic in particular, and especially through here, LMP2s are going to be a nightmare because I suspect from what we've seen in the WEC, they won't be that willing to wait. Then coming down towards the final chicane, I actually get up to 6th for some reason. I'm pretty sure in real life Fisichella only got up to 5th. So obviously we'll sort that out on the modelling, on the gearing. But you can see off to your right, in fact let me move it on a little bit. You can see the pit lane off to your right here. So you use that as a marker. Either start braking at the beginning of where the pit lane begins, or if you're really on it, you brake where the pit lane entrance ends, just where the curve starts. Brake very, very hard initially, really slow the car down, then third gear through the first chicane. And you want to try and, when you arrive at the chicane, and brake and go down to third. Again, very easy to take too much speed in, and then you've got a lot of steering angle as you're turning into the corner. So what you want to do is you want to try and brake hard and late, but also then start releasing the brake. Brake early enough that you can start releasing the brake pressure and flow it across this first part of the chicane over the curbs. And it's very important to have the car not completely straight, but as straight as you possibly can on the steering when you hit both of the curbs on the left and the right, especially the one on the left, because that will just spin you round off into the barrier on the left hand side. So just try and straight line this as much as you can with the steering. And then coming out of it, you want to come over and you'll never get it over to the white line on the right hand side unless you're super slow through the first chicane. So if you're quick through there, the best you can hope for normally is you end up in the middle or slightly to the right of middle here as you approach the final chicane out onto the straight, and this is second gear. Stopped it a bit too early there. So there you go, Bon. That's a lap. I hope that was helpful, and I will talk to you a little bit later or tomorrow.